Hi, this is Len. You can probably tell where I am by the sound of the waves. I am at Ocean Park, Maine, just south of Portland, and we've been here about a week at the cottage. Darlene has been doing a quilting workshop up in Harpswell, Maine, which just finished today. She is asleep up in bed. It's coming up on 9 o'clock, getting a little dark out here. So I thought I would talk to you for a while here by the ocean, and then when I get up to the cottage, the interview's all ready to go, and I won't have to be talking to the microphone in the same room that she's trying to sleep in. I also want to do this because today turned out to be a very pleasant example of things that happen here at Ocean Park, the place that I've been coming ever since I was a boy, and same with my dad. It goes way back in the family to my great-grandfather. And as I've thought about this place and this time of the year that has come to be kind of a seasonal pleasure for us, it has to do with time and it has to do with family. And that sounds kind of simple and obvious. But today I had a experience of it which has still got me kind of smiling, and I want to tell you about it. I had a plan to get this show done early. That's usually my plan when I climb Podcast Mountain on a Friday. So when Darlene went off to Harpswell, I was all ready to get cracking. But my sister Stephanie, who's here, said that she was going to be having lunch with her oldest friend, Susie Pierce, as we knew her in those days back in Wayland, Massachusetts. And in addition to being Steffi's oldest and best friend, Susie was kind of my first love in that sort of innocent way of a 7 or 8 year old, maybe 9. We went to the Strawberry Festival together. That's always been a marker for us. And thinking back, she was my first date, I suppose, at the Strawberry Festival. So I may have run into Susie once in my adult life, but I basically didn't remember her except for in those early days. So I said, can I come with you? I would love to just surprise Susie, show up, and give her a greeting. You guys can have lunch. I'll take Uber back, or maybe I'll work on the show there at a different table at the restaurant. So we drove up to Lois's Natural Food Market and Restaurant on Route 1 toward Portland. And when I saw her there, she was walking along the sidewalk and looking lovely and wonderful. She's always had curly hair and just a happy person. And I gave her a big hug, and it was a moment, you know. Here I am with Susie Pierce. And we visited for a while. We had salads and all these memories, you know, what her mother, you know, my mother called her mother Pesty Pierce, and all the things they did and the good times they had, and you know, as life goes on, the challenges that have come up. But even those things seem sort of soft in the remembering of them with such an old friend. So that got my day started in perhaps kind of an altered state, you know, that I came back to the cottage and said, all right, now I'm really going to buckle down and work on the show, and I can still have time to get it done before Darlene gets home. Well, just as I was about to start telling you the news of the day and the tech tip and all the rest, the air conditioning guy showed up. And the issue there was that the cottage that's next to the one we stay in, which is where Mom and Dad stay, and they're coming up next week. Dad's 92, Mom's 90. They're living in independent living and settling in after 9 months or so. And this is the place they had their honeymoon, and this is a place that they've been coming to all their lives, and they've got a plan to come up, and the logistics of getting them up here are challenging these days. And my nephew Seth, who stayed at the cottage this week, said, you know, that air conditioning on the second floor just doesn't seem to be working. And it's been chilly this week, so it really wasn't an issue. But if it was going to be 90 degrees when Mom and Dad get up here, that was not going to work. So I had called the people that put in the new compressor, and they showed up right away. And John and Josh showed up, and I showed them all of the vents and, you know, what was going wrong with the Nest thermostat. And And they went down into the crawl space to try to figure out what was happening. How come there wasn't any cool air blowing the way that it was supposed to? At this point, it's almost as if there was another self, my non-summer self or my non-Ocean Park self that would have just been tapping on the dining room table at the cottage saying, I got to get going here. I got to get this show on the road. And instead, I just found myself contented to sit there. I was looking at some of the episode things I was going to talk about on my iPhone and reading some news, and they would come up once in a while from the hole in the floor and say, well, we think it might be this, or it might be a switch, or it might be that. And they eventually figured out what the problem was, and maybe a half an hour had gone by then. I was all ready to just sort of say, well, thanks a lot, John. That's great. Send us the bill, whatever. But I don't know how it started, but either John or I said something that referenced an interest in politics, and he was off to the races. He had such a kind of a original take on all things political. He wasn't left, he wasn't right. In 2016, he wrote in his own name in the presidential election because he could not vote for either one of them. And I was just in a listening mood. I just was curious where he was coming from. So he went on for, 15 minutes, maybe more. Started in the upstairs, ended up in the kitchen, and by the time we'd left, and I'd shared some of my perspectives, it wasn't at all a listening thing. We shook hands warmly, and they headed off, and I thanked them very much for coming on such short notice to fix the air conditioning for Mom and Dad's visit. And that was, we got some folks walking along the beach here, returning. Yeah, we'll get out of their way there. So that was, I was running late, but could still get the show done because, I don't know, what was it? Maybe getting on 4 o'clock or so, and Darlene, I thought, might be coming home late on the last day of the workshop. Just at that moment, I got a text from my nephew, Seth, and it said, could you check the cottage for a stuffed walrus? It's what Luke sleeps with, and I think I left it. Now, Seth and his 2 boys, Luke and Matthew, and his daughter Eve, had been here this week at the cottage, and I had watched him pack up. You got 3 kids. There's a lot of gear that goes with moving 3 kids up for a week at the beach and back. And he was doing it. His wife was on another trip, and so he was responsible for the boys, and he was doing an amazing job. He was organizing all the packing. He was sweating, getting the car packed, and managing the kids. And I had this, when I saw that text, I had a stab of empathy or a poignant feeling for this young man managing these kids and doing such a good job. And he forgot the one thing he was supposed to absolutely not forget, which was the stuffed walrus, because Luke needed it to fall asleep with. So I, without even thinking about it, I said, I could probably FedEx it to you. I didn't know what that would mean, how far I'd have to drive, and it turned out I had to borrow Steffi's car because Darlene had the Tesla, and drive up to Portland in rush hour and sit there in traffic that was stalled, and took a picture of the walrus on the dashboard of the car and texted it to Seth, and found out that the walrus's name is Mao Mao, M-A-O, and got to the FedEx place, and a nice young woman named Lori was looking frazzled because it was getting toward the last truck's departure of the day. And I said, I got to get this walrus to my grandnephew in Lincoln, Mass. And can you help me find a box that would work? And so then she shifted into the same kind of soft space and said, well, I think he'd like it in this one, And she picked just the right size box so he'd have kind of a snug fit. But we weren't like stuffing an inanimate object. We were like giving him a nice place to ride to Lincoln, Mass. And got it off, and it's going to be delivered to Luke's home by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Pretty cool. Well, on the way back to the cottage from Portland, the FedEx office, I had one of those moments that sometimes I joke with Darlene and say, I've had 10 happy happy times in my life, and it's a rare thing. But this was one of them, and it was just the happiness of having done something for this kid to reunite him with his stuffed walrus. And when I was a boy, my stuffed animals were like, they were essential, and I had a lot of creativity making up stories about them and all that. I'm walking back up to the cottage now because the mosquitoes are getting me. And so driving back to Portland, it was just this sense of what a fun thing to have done. And Seth was so appreciative. I kind of saved the day and had a chance to be kind of a hero in my nephew's eyes. And we exchanged some appreciative texts back and forth for each other. And it was very sweet. So when I think about the confluence of family and time here, that is what has added up to this day feeling unusual. And I'm standing here looking at the cottage that my dad's mother's father bought back in the 30s, and it's kind of grown into a little place where the family has come over the years. And I'm standing here on the boardwalk, 68 years old, going to be 69 in August, and picturing right there next to the cottage, I remember getting a tricycle that I wrote that song about. And then all this family, the nephews and the grandnephews and my daughters and my grandsons and my parents in their 90s. And they all spread out and intersect with this particular place in Maine. And I guess it makes me feel larger and smaller at the same time, or it softens me up. It messes with my usual requirements for happiness, that I'm going to get this show done early, and it's going to look just like this, or it's going to look just like that. And the events and the coincidences of this day just sort of shook me off the usual track in a way that was very pleasant. And that's, if this were Garrison Keillor, that would be, that's the news from Lake Wobegon. That's the news from Ocean Park, Maine. And I'll head up now and be talking fairly softly there in the room to not wake Darlene up and get this show on its way to you. Man, these mosquitoes are eating me alive. Okay, the interview this week is with Chris Schluep and Erin Kodicek. They are book editors at Amazon.com, and that means they are part of a team that reads a ton of books year-round in order to recommend great reading for Amazon customers. The book editors last week announced their best books of the year so far list, and I reached Chris and Erin by Skype on Monday, June 24th, to talk about the selections. I began by asking them to tell us about their work before joining the books team, starting with Erin Kodicek.
I've actually been at Amazon for 12 years now, which is why I look so tired. I'm glad your listeners can't see that. But I actually started on the Kindle team, and I helped launch the Kindle. And now, I think I've been on the physical books team, well, we're all one team now, for 5 years. But we've all been in the book industry all of our lives. So before that, I was working in brick-and-mortar bookstores.
I didn't realize you were on the Kindle team. So were you... You were on the Kindle team before the Kindle was even launched?
I was on the original team that launched the Kindle, yes. The Etch-a-Sketch with the scroll wheel, I was there.
That's pretty cool. And Chris, how long have you been at Amazon?
I've been at Amazon for 8 years, and I started in publishing and came out here to do this job.
Great. And you have a new leader now of the team, Sarah Gelman?
That's right. We've worked with Sarah for... forever.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I've worked with Sarah since I started here. But yeah, she is our new leader. So it's good because she comes from a publicity background, and I think that's going to help us to get out to more people.
Yeah, and I've met her. I think she moved out to Seattle from New York, right?
Sarah and I worked together in New York too. We never would have imagined that this is where we would end up working together again. But it's been great.
It's a great books town.
Why do you release a list called Best Books of the Year so far. It's only June. This seems early for a list with that name. What's the thinking?
So June is the halfway marker for the year, and it's also a time when a lot of people are going on vacation. So they're going to want to be filling their bags and filling their Kindles with books. And if you're having trouble figuring out what to fill those things with, we are happy to help you. So just visit amazon.com/bestbooksofar.
It used to be that a lot of the big books were held for the fall or the second half of the year. But I think last year you said the best books of the year so far ended up being the best book for the whole year. Is there a trend of the best books may end up being published at any time during the year instead of the second half?
Yeah, I think there was always a thought that you had to put your big books out in the fall. That was the big reading time. It was also a big review time. It was before Christmas, or the holiday sales. But what people started figuring out was there are a lot of good windows to publish a great book, and you might have a little bit less noise around it. So last year we had never picked a number one book in Best of the Year so far that ended up being our best book of the year. So that was actually a little troubling for us.
It was. That book was educated by Tara Westover, and it was actually published in February, I believe, of last year. We tried to find a book that was better than Educated, but we just couldn't do it.
I said to Tara Westover, I said I feel like it's my job to find a book to push your book off of number one. She took it pretty well, actually, and we couldn't do it. So yeah,
she did.
Well, and you felt uncomfortable with that just because it was sort of giving that top shot to the same book. It's sort of like doing it twice as opposed to having a chance to shine the light that brightly on another book. Is that why it was a little unnerving? That
was part of it, and just sort of the tradition of there's got to be a big, great book that comes out, and maybe we're missing something. But I think we made the right choice.
I do too.
Remind me about how many people are on the books team that are reaching the consensus for this list?
There's 5 of us on the editorial team, but then we also have a group of voracious readers from across the company that help us, and it's sort of like a big book club, but with no wine. And the other difference is that we're reading books that are not available to the public yet. So, for example, we're reading books that are coming out in September right now.
Oh, right.
I mean, we're reading some books that are coming out in 2020 right now.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And when you prepare the best book so far, what are the discussions like? What are the kind of rules of engagement? And if you have a book that you love, are there kind of accepted arguments to try to get it up the list, and things that aren't so accepted? Or I'd love to sit in on one of these discussions, but what would I hear if I did?
I always like to say we do it the old-fashioned way. We argue, but the reality is we pick best of the month every month. So we have a bunch of books that we're starting with. We have kind of a skeleton of what we're following, and then around April or so, we start thinking about what are the best books that we've read this year, to start coming up with a list. Then we start talking and cajoling and horse trading a little bit, and then in the end, if it comes down to it, we argue. But it's fairly civil.
Yeah, it's lively, as you can imagine, and that's because we're all passionate bookworms, and we all have varying reading tastes too. And that's really by design also, because our customers have varying reading tastes. So, when you come to our features, whether it's Best Books of the Month or Best Books of the Year so far, and you're somebody that likes to read literary fiction or history or mystery or romance or science fiction, whatever it is that you like to read, you should be able to go to those features and find a great book for you.
Yeah, that's really important to us, to be omnivorous readers, to read across a spectrum of different kinds of books, and to recommend the best book in that genre.
Now, I want to get to kind of the top 10 of the best books, but you also, as you've just said, you help people find books within certain genres at this point in the year. What are the genres that people can also go to at this best book site and find help to their particular taste?
So we have 14 categories from nonfiction, science fiction. I mean,
everything in between: biographies and memoirs, history, mystery, literary fiction, and children's. Yes.
And how deep do you go? Like, say, if I'm a voracious mystery reader, am I going to find 20 of the best mysteries so far this year, or is there a certain number, or some categories have different numbers?
20 in each category.
Yep.
20 in each category. So that's fantastic, because then you can go right, and then you're sort of plucking from all the categories when you create that sort of top list.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
top list is the creme de la creme.
And it doesn't necessarily represent every category. We're really trying to pick the best of the best.
Well, let's dig right into that. City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. I listened to that interview, Erin, that you did with her. That was fascinating. Tell us about that book and why it maybe is a good fit for the times.
It really is a read for our times. It takes place in New York in the 1940s, and it's this bawdy, big-hearted romp, and there's this really colorful character in it who's the proprietor of this dilapidated theater, and she says at one point, "People are suffering, life is hard, let's put on a show." So for prospective readers of this book, I would say, people are suffering, life is hard, read this book because it'll cheer you up. I think it's the injection of joy that we need right now.
And Elizabeth Gilbert, that interview talks that each of her novels is in some ways an autobiography. What were you picking up in talking to what she was working on as she was writing this book?
Yeah, I think for this book and for her last book, Signature of All Things, she talks about how fiction is really a less constrained form of memoir. So when you're reading it, you feel like you're reading a little bit of an autobiography. You're getting some inside scoop on Elizabeth Gilbert. It's really fascinating.
Well, let's work down. Now, I've got on my fire. Ooh, I've got the list. It looks like from left to right is going from top to bottom. So is the next one The Silent Patient?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that was a book that came out early in the year, actually. And at the time, we said it felt like it could be the big debut thriller of the year. Turns out to be the big debut thriller of the year so far. So we'll see at the end of the year. But the story is basically there's a woman. Her name is Alicia Berenson. She's a painter, and she's married to this sort of glamorous photographer. They live in this big house in London. She comes home one day and shoots her husband 5 times in the face, and then refuses to speak again. And is institutionalized outside of London, and doesn't talk until this criminal psychologist, Theo Faber, kind of works his way in to talk to her. I would say that the first few chapters take a little bit of time to get going, but once this book starts rolling, it starts rolling. It's very cinematic. There are great twists and turns. I think it's definitely it's a great read, and it's obviously resonated with readers as well.
And this is a debut, first book published by this author?
That's right. And he used to be, I think he's a screenwriter by trade, I believe. So that really shines through in the book.
Next one is Once More We Saw Stars.
Yes, Jason Green. This is an incredibly moving memoir. Jason lost his 6-year-old daughter, or no, 2-year-old daughter, I think, to a freak accident. And so this book is about loss, it's about grief, and it's about how you embrace your life again in the face of those things.
Just the idea of that book terrifies me. It must have something to overcome the terror that any parent or grandparent would have to even hear that setup. What makes it something that isn't terrifying to read once you've finished it?
I think that none of us are immune to these profound losses in life. It's part of life. And I think he has said when something like that happens, people will say, "I'm sorry, I have no words." And his response to that is, there are words, and I've put my words in this book, and it can be just as healing for you to read them as it was for me to write them.
That's beautiful. Mrs. Everything.
Mrs. Everything, yes, this is by Jennifer Weiner. I think it's her best book yet, and it is a multi-generational tale of two sisters, and it really traces how far women have come from the 1950s until today, but also how far we have to go.
And that's a novel?
It is a novel. Mm-hmm. It's based on her mother, though. She was inspired by her mother, one of the characters in it, Jo. So it's very personal as well.
The Night Tiger.
The Night Tiger by Yangzi Chu is an unusual literary murder mystery that's set in colonial Malaysia. And I say unusual because there's some supernatural elements to it. But I think if you're someone that is a traditional literary fiction reader or a traditional murder mystery reader, I really encourage you to pick this one up and give it a go, because I think it'll broaden your reading horizons and you'll be really glad that you did.
In either direction, if you think you only read literary fiction, you might broaden to find out there's some good thrillers to read as well.
Exactly.
Daisy Jones and the Six.
So this is a book that's told as an oral history. It's about a band that didn't really exist in the late 60s and early 70s, but because of the format, it seems very real. There was a band called The Six, and it was led by this sort of charismatic leader named Billy Dunn. But they didn't really take off until they brought on this sort of young, mysterious singer named Daisy Jones, and this is basically that story. Taylor Jenkins Reid does a great job of sort of releasing the story to build tension, and and then it seems so real because of the format. It's a really fun read.
Underland.
So this is an interesting book. This is not a good book if you're claustrophobic. It's basically about everything that's under our feet, from caves to underground rivers to the catacombs of Paris, even to nuclear waste sites. And so it's part adventure. It's part sort of natural history. It's very much a sort of philosophical journey. He talks a lot about deep time, which when compared to sort of human history is a much longer and more stable period. And he associates deep time with all the things that are under our feet. So I would call it sort of a thinking person's adventure.
Well, and it sounded, I think, from the podcast, he said that he actually did all these things. He didn't use a double, or it was that. The
adventure is following him. I mean, it's really he's the guy you're following around to all these places. It's great.
And the unwinding of the miracle.
This is another tearjerker, sad book, and we loved it for the same reasons that we loved the previous sad book that we just spoke about. I would say that these are actually books that I don't think that I like in my normal life. I think I don't. And then every once in a while you pick up one of these books and you start reading it. And the language is so beautiful. And like Erin said, you actually feel better about life when you turn the last page. In this case, Julie Yip Williams was born in Vietnam. She came to this country poor. She studied hard. She became a successful lawyer. She married the man of her dreams. She had 2 great kids, and then she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so I like to say that this is a memoir that looks at our worst fear, which is that we would be diagnosed with a terminal disease, but then also looks at our greatest hope, which is that we would face life fully and honestly. So I found this ultimately very uplifting, and it's a beautifully written book.
Yeah. How about Save Me the Plums?
Yes, Save Me the Plums is a food memoir by famed chef and food writer Ruth Reichel. And these food memoirs continue to be popular, and this is another really terrific one. It covers her tenure at the storied Gourmet magazine.
Now I'm flipping through on my screen here. How many are we at? Number 10 yet?
The next one is number 10.
Okay, let's do it. That's by Thomas Harris.
It's pronounced Carrie Mora, we believe. So
we were on.
Yes, that's the tough thing with books. Someone has to listen to an audiobook right there. But Carrie Mora is a character in the latest Thomas Harris novel. He, of course, wrote Silence of the Lambs and invented Hannibal Lecter, which for that alone he deserves just a lot of credit, I guess. But it's been 13 years since he published his last book. There was no Hannibal Lecter in this book. Instead, there's a person named Hans Peter Schneider who's equally creepy. And the basic story is that there are 1,000 pounds of gold buried under a mansion in Miami. And everybody's trying to find it. And Carrie Mora is the caretaker of the mansion. She's been through a lot in her life. She now has to deal with Hans Peter Schneider. And there are lots of twists and turns. There's some delightful murders. There are
as murders go.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick read, so it's kind of a perfect summer read to stop on. Yeah, we really like this book.
That's great. When you look at the list that you came up with, I imagine some of them are already pretty visible on other lists, getting a lot of discussion. Is there one or two that you're glad is on the list because so far they haven't got the notice that perhaps you hope they will receive, partly through being on your list?
This is interesting for us because I think, since we do Best of the Month, we hope that we've already brought attention to them on some level. And then also, when we're reading the books, we're reading, as Erin said earlier, we're reading months in advance. So we're basically reading in a vacuum. We don't know. We know that, Thomas Harris's latest novel is going to get some attention. But something like Unwinding of a Miracle or, Underland or anything like that, we're not so sure. So
I still think, though, if people haven't taken notice by now, then we're not doing our jobs. So we take that very seriously, and we really try to highlight these books initially in the Best Books of the Month part of the equation, and then now, and especially now, it's great to have. That's the other thing that's great about Best Books of the Year so far, because we have another bite of the apple. So that we can say, hey, these really are incredible. Please read them.
So our hope is that we've brought attention to these books initially, and that now we're really pulling out the best books and saying you should really pay attention to these ones.
Exactly. Now, has Amazon been doing this for about 10 years now in terms of highlighting best books? And
even more.
I think longer, actually. Yeah, because it was actually when I was an editor, I remember I got a book in the top 10 of the best of the year, and
big deal.
It was a big deal. Yeah, so it's I was paying attention to this for years before I got here, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's been 20 years.
Oh, well, now and with that history, and just we know how popular Amazon is as a place to buy books. If a book gets one of these top spots on the list, do the publishers really have to scramble to print enough of them, or what kind of impact, in general terms, can you say, is there on the sales of a book that gets this kind of attention?
I would say, it varies, because this is more of an art than a science. Publishing in general, I think, is. So sometimes things really resonate, and sometimes it's just crickets. But, but we have, there are definitely examples of books that we have made with our list, and we're really, really proud of that.
I will say, though, that when we are compiling these lists, sales isn't something that we take into consideration. It truly is, what was your favorite book, or what book resonated with you the most?
And what book do we think that readers will love?
Right. It seems like in the past I've seen in the Amazon bookstores books that your team has highlighted, and it's specifically said. Is there going to be some kind of displays about these books that you've chosen in the stores, and maybe in the 4-star stores as well?
Yes, you can go into the Amazon brick-and-mortar bookstores right now, and you can find our Best Books of the Year so far picks, and you can also find City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert in the 4-star stores. Yeah,
because the 4-star stores, it's a collection of books along with everything else. There's one of those in Denver, and I went in, and it was just like entering a trance. It was like, there's dog stuff here, and there's a book, and then there's the gear, and I don't know. I sort of love those stores. If you think back on the discussions, was there one book that it took a lot longer to reach a consensus about compared with the others?
I think typically the most discussion usually surrounds what the number one pick is going to be. And last year with Educated by Tara Westover, and this year with City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert, they were unanimous selections, which is extremely rare. So for us, I think most of the discussion generated was about the rest of the order. We put a lot of thought into the order. Yeah, the top 10 in particular.
We don't want to have a narrow book at the top. We want to have a book that is, will appeal to a broad enough audience that they're not like, who are these people? Like, what are they trying to do to me? So, once we get through the top 3, we can start sort of getting to narrower books. But yeah, that's our view, is that we want readers to find a book they love, not a specific type of reader.
I'm looking out at a beach here, and I know there's probably going to be lots of people reading. Thinking about beach reading, Are there one or two that are shorter than the others? That'd be kind of a quick read at the beach, and how about at the other end? Are there any Moby Dicks out there, or huge novels that people just love carrying around in paper or on their Kindles? What's the sort of the shortest and the longest of the list?
I would recommend the thrillers, as they're short. They're shorter. I mean, I think that the two sad books, the Jason Green and the Julie Yip Williams, are probably even shorter.
Perhaps mercifully shorter.
Yeah, but I would not recommend them for beach reading. Yeah,
not a beach read.
Yeah,
and City of Girls is a great summer read, and I have to say, when it first landed on my desk with a thud, I was a little suspicious. It's kind of a brick, and I thought, this is the author of Eat, Pray, Love. So did her editor come in and say, Liz, you just do what you do, but I have to say there's not a wasted page, and it's a really propulsive, quick read.
And then deeper down the list, I don't know where it is, but it's in the second half of the top 20, is a book called The Parisian by Isabella Hammad. It's a debut novel. It's sort of an old-fashioned, sweeping book about a Palestinian man who goes to France, falls in love with France and with a woman, eventually returns to his homeland. I would say that's the Moby Dick of this list. It's just a big, sweeping, old-fashioned novel is what I'd call it.
Yeah.
Now, I've been following the podcast that you all are doing, and did it start early this year? Or when did it come up? I think
early this year, I think, yeah.
You're doing it every couple of weeks. You've got interviews with authors, including Elizabeth Gilbert on the most recent one. As a podcaster, I'm curious, when you launched this idea of a podcast for the book review and the book editors, what you hope to accomplish, and then what you've learned about podcasting on this topic of books and authors. Has your vision of what you're doing when you sit around a microphone kind of evolved over the last few months?
Well, first of all, we since we started, we have a lot more respect for people like you who do it well.
Every week.
Yeah. It's a lot harder than it sounds. That we've learned that.
Yeah, I somewhat jokingly say that we should record them during happy hour, because I think once the microphone gets turned on, occasionally some stage fright will set in, mm-hmm. and when that happens, I'm comforted by something that I heard Brandon Stanton say. He is of Humans of New York fame, and he was giving this talk in front of a huge group of people, and he was very, very nervous, and someone said to him, not that you want that to overpower you, but that's actually a good sign that you're nervous, because it means that you care, and it means that you respect your audience. So I would say to our audience, whether we sound nervous or not, we care about what we're doing, and we respect you and appreciate you for listening.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing is going back and listening to yourself and trying to figure out how to improve. I don't know if you've found that when you first started.
Oh yeah,
but yeah. So we're working on it, and I think we're getting great people in, and I think we're becoming more comfortable in front of the microphone, so we're pretty happy with the way it's going.
Once in a while when you're doing a podcast, your mind just goes blank.
So luckily if you're editing...
I'm glad this happens to you too.
He's so crisp with his questions. There's no gaps at all.
So I've done a lot of interviews with authors, and I hadn't really had much experience with it before. And when you're sitting down with an author, what do you hope happens? Are you? I mean, you want to tell enough about the book that people can decide whether or not to read it. Obviously you don't want spoilers, but I have this sense that I haven't quite figured out yet what the perfect author interview looks like. I have sometimes when I connect with an author and I think, God, that was just great. I had a sense that I get to know them and that they enjoyed the conversation. That's one thing I sort of test myself by. But do you have any kind of a template that or aspirations when you sit down with an author in this setting of what you hope will happen?
Yeah, I think I probably have a shorter answer than you, but
always.
I've been working with authors for a long time, and so I don't worry too much about whether we're going to hit it off, because we generally do. But the thing that I'm trying to express to a listener is why I'm so excited about their book, like this author's book. Like that's what I most want to express. Like I want someone to think, oh, this is something I care about. This is something I want to read or look into. So it's very simple for me.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I always think, what do I want to get out of an author interview when I'm listening to one? And I listen to them for one of two reasons. Either I'm trying to figure out whether or not I want to read their book, and so I need more information to be able to make that decision. Or I'm already a fan of that author. I'm going to buy the book. Maybe I already read the book, but I want some nugget of, interesting information about that book or about the author that I don't already know. So for me, if we can take care of those two groups of people, then I think we've done our job. And my goal is to not bore the person that I'm interviewing, because a lot of times they're on a book tour, they're answering the same questions over and over again, and those are very necessary questions. But I love it, when they say, hey, nobody's ever asked me that before. That's a really great question. It doesn't happen often, but it's something that I always strive for.
Yeah, I should revise my answer. I should say I've been working with authors a lot, so I know that some are just going to hate you no matter how hard you try. So I'm fine. I'm comfortable with that. It's fine.
You're okay with that.
But generally, I get along with them.
Because of my education and basic academic nerdism, I don't know if I've ever actually interviewed an author that I didn't stay up late reading the whole book.
Yeah.
But I know that that's going to happen. In fact, it may happen this week. I'm trying to finish a book that
was sent to me for an interview Thursday. But are you always interviewing people when you've read the whole book? And if not, what's your strategy for talking to an author and sort of without a net, knowing that you might ask something that proves that you haven't read the book?
Oh, no, I will read that book 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
And they're going to happen.
Before you do the interview.
2 or 3 times? Oh, my. Now you're really scaring me.
Well, I don't read it 2 or 3 times, but I'll read it. And I think because I think they can tell. Like often they'll thank you. They'll say like, "Oh, I can tell you read the book." That happened to me. We do things called fish bowls here, where we interview an author in front of a big group of Amazon employees. And I talked to Admiral McCraven, who wrote "Make Your Bed" and then "Sea Stories." And we were talking mostly about sea stories. And when I got done, I was talking to his wife, and she's like, "You actually read the book."
Sea Stories, by the way, is the top pick in the history category for best books of the year so far.
And but it's happened with lots of other people, where they actually will thank us for reading the book.
And that always feels nice, when you hear that, and it's also kind of sad because you think, they're talking to a lot of people that haven't read the book.
But on the other hand, I always ask, the first question I tend to ask is, how do you describe the book? Which sounds like a question someone who hasn't read the book would ask, But it is I think it's important to know how they describe their book.
Yeah, and that's a question they know they're going to get asked, so it is sort of a handy starting place. I remember hearing on the New York Times book review podcast once, Dwight Garner was talking about a time he'd been handed an author interview at the last minute, and he had not read a page of the book. And so he's trying to, and he came up with a brilliant solution to the problem. He sat down and he said, "So, your book, why now?"
15 minutes. Like a brilliant question.
I'm going to keep that in my back pocket.
Yeah, actually, that does there was a time at BEA a few years ago, probably 5 years ago, when I interviewed Sarah Wilson is our kids editor. And she was supposed to talk to Daniel Handler, who wrote the Lemony Snicket books. He's a big deal. I have not read the Lemony Snicket books.
Yeah. She was sick, right?
Yeah, she was sick. She gave me the questions, and my first question was about Lemony Snicket.
Uh-oh.
So I think he figured out pretty quickly that I hadn't read the book, and then he just proceeded to sort of dissect me.
Yeah, that is not something you want to happen with Daniel Handler, because he'll just wipe the floor with you in the best way.
He was hilarious.
He was hilarious.
I was laughing at the same time that he was
you were dying.
Wiping the floor with me.
It might have ended up being a more interesting interview because of the happenings are certainly entertaining.
I think I was upfront about the fact that I hadn't read the book. Read the book.
No, that would have given him something different to do on the book tour, is to wipe up the floor with an interviewer.
Yeah.
Well, this is great, and I think on behalf of my listeners and readers everywhere, we appreciate the work you put into this, because it is so helpful. I mean, there's so many books to read, and to have an organized list and one that, this kind of care goes into, it's really quite a good service. And so thank you for the work.
Thanks for getting the word out there. And you're right, we do love our job. It's a great job, and we're happy we can help people.
Yeah. And again, it's Amazon.com/best book so far.
Great. Thanks to you both. Take care. Let me turn off the recording now.
I'll do the same. Thanks, Len.
That's it for this week. Next week's guest will be Lauren Mechling, author of a satirical yet moving novel titled How Could She?, published last week by Viking. I have finished the book, which is about the complex friendships among three women whose lives take them apart and then bring them together in surprising ways. And I recorded my conversation with Lauren yesterday. I told Darlene that I was about 2/3 of the way through the book and nothing had happened yet, which actually showed how my understanding of women's friendship is very rudimentary. The book finishes with quite an impact, and I really enjoyed hearing from its author about why she wrote the book and what she hopes it reveals. Music for my podcast is from an original Thelonius Monk composition named Well You Needn't. This version is Ra Monk by Eval Manigat on the Variations in Time, a Jazz Perspective CD by Public Transit Recording. This is Len Edgerly for the Kindle Chronicles in Ocean Park, Maine. Hope you've enjoyed our time at the beach here, and there'll be more as the summer goes on.